السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. Inshallah, before we move forward with our lessons in our lessons in Fiqh Tahara, I just wanted to clarify something. Just a shortcoming on my end is that I believe it was the last class or the class before, I had some type of error. Some of my notes, I had a couple pages missing, so some information was it was a little bit confusing, and I mentioned that last time, and I apologize for the confusion. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I said we were going to move forward to things that nullify major tahara, but like I said, I had some confusion because of unorganization on my end. May Allah forgive me. And that being said, we still have some more to cover under the heading of what nullifies minor tahara or wudoo. So we took up until now, I believe, 4 nullifiers of al-wudoo or minor tahara, and that is al-kharij min as-sabilayn, or what is emitted from the private part, the front and the back side. We also discussed what's emitted from what's emitted that's kind of repulsive from other parts of the body as well, like bleeding and that kind of stuff, and vomit and so on. We also discussed somebody sleeping or losing consciousness as well. And up until now, I believe that's what we covered. For the brothers that are following along every week, did we cover anything else? Do you guys remember we covered anything else? Or this is what we went in detail. I know we spoke about them. Generally, before going into a topic, we kind of go over all the headings, but this is what we covered in detail, correct? Was there anything else? No. Okay, alhamdulillah. So the next nullifier we're going to speak about, nullifier of wudoo, it is Mash al-Farj. Mash al-Farj is touching the private parts, and today we're going to focus on touching the private parts for a male to touch his private organ, okay? And this will be separated from the issue of a female touching her private part, okay? So this mas'ala here we'll take today, inshallah. Hopefully we're going, and some of the masail you'll see that some of the masail we went over it was pretty detailed, it was in depth quite a bit, and then some of the masail we kind of went through it a little bit faster. And just depending on the content of what we're going through, sometimes it's good to expand on certain things so we have a deeper understanding of the content we are learning. Because, like, for example, I know when it came to the steps of wudoo, we went over it rather fast, and that is because it's straightforward and all the other things align with it. Plus, we have gone through different dawrat or series in which we also went in that in detail. So I don't want to keep on being on repeat. So that's why in some areas I speed it up a little bit, and sometimes I go into more detail and depth. And inshallah ta'ala, in it is benefit. If anything in it is good, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anything that is error or mistaken or bad, it's from myself and from shaitan. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make these beneficial lessons, inshallah ta'ala. So this mas'ala here of touching the private part of a man or a male touching his private organ, does it break wudoo or not? So this is it could be divided into 5 or 6 opinions. The first 2 being the obvious opposites, which is it breaking the wudoo, the first opinion being it does not break the wudoo at all whatsoever. And the second opinion being that it breaks the wudoo no matter what. Okay? So these are the first 2. And why I said it can be divided into 5 or 6 opinions is because Shafi'i rahimahullah in his madhab, he has an opinion that is kind of a branch of the second one, that it breaks wudoo, but he mentioned or got a specification that breaking wudoo, meaning if the person touches with the palm of his hand and not the back side of his hand. But we'll just combine it into 2, just so it's a little bit more, so we don't have to go into unnecessary branches, inshallah, or depth. And then there are 3 other opinions that are kind of a way to reconcile between the differences, the different opinions, or the different adilla on this matter. And the third is then the ulama that said that touching the male private part with desire is what nullifies wudoo. Another opinion, the fourth, is touching it purposely is what nullifies wudoo. And a fifth is that it is just mustahab to repeat the wudoo and it is not a wajib. So that makes 5 opinions. So we'll start with the first one. We'll start with the first one, inshallah. And that is that touching the private part doesn't nullify wudu at all. And this is unconditional. No matter, like without any other stipulation. No matter what, it does not nullify the wudu. And this is the opinion held by the Hanafiya and the Malikiyya. And some of the Sahaba that held this opinion were Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, Ammar bin Yasir, and others. And some of the Tabi'een that it's attributed to is Ibn al-Mundhir, Rabiʻ, Sufyan al-Thawri. And their proof to support their opinion, it centers around the hadith, which is hadith Talq ibn Ali al-Hanafi, or hadith Talq, or the hadith of Qais ibn Talq, which is what we'll use to refer to it, the hadith of Talq. And this is a narration in which the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked, brothers, there's a jama'ah happening over there, one. Yeah. And this is from a hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked about a man touching his private parts and whether it invalidates wudu or not. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, or reported to have said in this hadith, لا إنما هو بضعة منك, or هل هو إلا مضغة منه, or ليس فيه وضوء إنما هو منك. Which all essentially, these different narrations or different phrases, all essentially mean the same thing, which is no, wudu is not required because it is a part of you, meaning a part of your body. And their rationale for this opinion is just as the hadith states, that it is the male organ is like any other part of the body, such as your leg or your arm. Meaning that if somebody touches their leg or their elbow or their forehead or something, they do not have to make wudu from it. And therefore they compare any other part of the body, including the private parts, to that. However, a problem with this opinion is that this hadith is weak. And from the ulama who weakened it was Imam al-Shafi'i and Ibn al-Jawzi and Abu Hatim and Bayhaqi and Dar Al Sunnah and Abu Zur'a and others. And this opinion, they also use other weak hadith to support their opinion that we don't have to go into. And they also argued that when somebody performs Tahara, what is certain is their Tahara. And we have a general principle, which is that what is certain, okay, we go by what is certain and not what is doubtful. So therefore, if Tahara is established, it does not become nullified unless there is a clear proof that states it's a nullifier, not just some doubtful opinions. And since there is no proof of it being a nullifier according to these scholars that held this opinion, then it doesn't nullify wudu. They also, from the ulama that held this opinion, they also used as an evidence a debate or a conversation that took place between Sufyan and Ibn Jurayj rahimahumullah, in which Sufyan, he said that there is no wudu for one who touches his private part. Meaning, like, he doesn't have to make wudu for touching his private part. Meaning, it does not nullify the wudu. Ibn Jurayj, he said, yes, actually the opposite. He has to make wudu. So Sufyan, he tried to use some intellect or some reasoning or qiyas, and he asked Ibn Jurayj, if somebody has mani or semen on their hand, what does he have to do? Does he have to make wudu? Ibn Jurayj, he said, no, he just has to simply wash his hand. Then Sufyan, he said, what's worse or what's bigger or what's more heavier? Someone having mani on their hand, semen on their hand, or someone touching their private part? Then Ibn Jurayj, he said, this is from shaitan. And the argument that this opinion is using here is that what Sufyan mentioned, rahimahullah, is that he's trying to make qiyas between one having semen on their hand as opposed to touching their private part. So because someone and everyone can agree that something that's greater or heavier upon them is someone having many on their hand as opposed to touching their private organ. Okay, nevertheless, if somebody has that, it does not necessitate wudoo. And Al-Bayhaqi rahimahullah, he said, commenting on this, he said, what Ibn Jurayj mentioned, that this is from shaitan, is his point, or why he said this is from shaitan, is because it is from shaitan to try to resort to qiyas when we have clear, authentic ahadith on the matter. So, you do not resort to qiyas when you have proof. There's no need to make qiyas when you have a clear dalil to support what you're saying. That's what he meant by saying this is from shaitan. And another argument that this opinion holds is that touching the private part is something that is very common. Okay, it happens very, very frequently. And it cannot be accepted through ahadith and ahad. It must be through ahadith mutawatir. And this goes back to a very broad issue in usul, which is whether we accept ahadith ahad for certain issues or not. Okay? I don't want to go into too much depth regarding this, but just as a recap, I know we spoke about this previously. Does anybody recall what is ahadith ahad? What does that mean? Now, that the hadith, it reaches us from one or a few narrators, okay, on the levels of transmission. Okay, so the hadith at one level of transmission, for example, at the level of a Sahaba, there is only one or a very few amount of Sahaba that narrated, and then at the level below them, the same thing, and onward. Okay, so what the reasoning behind this is that if it's just a small number of narrators, it is conceivable, or it is a possibility that those few narrators kind of conspired to make up something. Okay, this is kind of the reasoning behind it. However, and then the opposite of that is a hadith that's considered mutawatira or mutawatir, and the hadith that is mutawatir is a hadith that is reported by a very large number of narrators to the point where it cannot be conceived that all of these narrators all gathered together to conspire with one another to make up something. Okay, it's reported by too many people that that it can become possible for them to have conspired to make up something. Okay. However, just to summarize this usuli matter here, the very basic and short answer is that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah accept ahadith ahad that are authentic. Okay, so as long as the hadith is authentic, then the hadith al-ahad are accepted according to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And evidence quickly to support that is, you know, the famous hadith that's mentioned in the beginning of many collections of hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, the hadith of Umar radiallahu anhu. This hadith is hadith ahad, it's classified as ahad, and in fact has it's classified ahad at each level in the chain of narration as well. Okay, so obviously we know from the previous lessons we have taken, from what we know from Tahara and whatnot, that people, they accept this hadith, we accept this, okay? And a much bigger evidence, and it's very straightforward and clear and really requires nothing more than it, is that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he sent individual Sahaba to certain areas of the world to convey the message of Islam. Okay, we know that he sent, for example, Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, or Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhuma, to convey the whole message of Islam, not just because some people, they say we do not accept ahad in certain masail like aqidah or ahkam or whatnot. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent one or two Sahaba to a whole area or a balad or a country or whatnot to convey Islam to them. And this is not just a mas'ala aqadiyya or some ahkam. No, they're conveying Islam as a whole. And one person was sufficient to convey that. Okay, so that's very straightforward and clear. Nothing more is really required than that. Another evidence is you know in the ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. That it is not for the believers to go all out and fight in the battle at once. From every division of them, a group shall, according to difference of opinion in the tafsir, a group shall stay back or a group shall go forth to gain knowledge and understand the deen of Allah, and then go and teach and warn the people when they return to them. Where is the shahid here? Is that a ta'ifa is small people, a small group of people. So if only a ta'ifa are going to either stay back or to go forth, depending on what opinion you take from the mufassirin, that small ta'ifa is going to convey what they learned from deen to their people once they return. Okay, so that ta'ifa, it is, in other words, ahad. Okay, nevertheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed this in the Quran. So just to summarize, like I said, the opinion of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that we accept a hadith ahad as long as they are authentic, like any other hadith we come across. Moving forward, another argument that this opinion now. There's also another dalil, which is also a very, very strong example to prove that we accept a hadith ahad or khabar ahad, is that when the qibla changed, the Muslims were praying. Okay, they were being led in prayer and they were praying and they were still facing where? Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem. And then a sahabi who just prayed with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was informed that the qibla had changed. He came across them and encountered them while they were praying. And you know, geographically, and if they're in Al-Madinah, where does Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis and Mecca lie? Jerusalem is north of Al-Madinah, like almost directly north, whereas Mecca is almost directly south. So if you can imagine, they were facing one direction. During the salah, okay, the sahabi who knew that the hukm had changed or that the qibla had changed, he told them while they were praying that the qibla had changed. What did the sahaba do? They stopped, did they finish their prayer and then after say, what were you talking about? We heard you. Or did they stop the salah and have a discussion? They had a fiqh debate? No, they didn't do any of that. During the salah, what happened is the jama'ah switched positions completely to face the qibla that they were informed of, which obviously and clearly shows that they accepted the khabar of one person. Okay? That's a very good example as well. And there are other examples we can take as well, but because it's a kind of a deeper usuli issue, I don't want to go into it too much, but to summarize, like we said, this is more than sufficient, and this is the opinion of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay, another argument that this opinion made is that from the ahadith that require, they try to reconcile between the hadith of talq, which states that no wudoo is required from touching the private part. They try to reconcile between that and the other ahadith which mention that wudoo, which we're going to touch on here shortly, that mention that wudoo is required from touching the private part, is that they say that the wudoo that is mentioned here, like we mentioned I think in 2 classes ago, that this wudoo refers to linguistically just cleaning or washing. But the straightforward answer to that is that we cannot divert the meaning of wudoo in the hadith to other than what we know by Islamic context of the ritual purification without any dalil to do so. Okay, we're not allowed to just change meanings as we see fit to fit our opinion. No, we have to have evidence to divert this meaning al-wudoo to a different meaning linguistically, because that is not the norm. Okay, the norm when we are referring to in the hadith wudoo is referring to the ritual purification that we all know. Another point as well is that there's no need to begin with, okay, by default, we do not even have to try to reconcile between conflicting ahadith or reports unless they're both authentic. So we said the hadith of talq is weak to begin with. So if there is other ahadith that have an opposite meaning, there's no need to reconcile between them, because we can we can declare the logic because there is something that is authentic. Okay, we do not have to resort to trying to justify or trying to reconcile and consolidate different opinions, because we have an authentic hadith, whereas one is weak. So that is the first opinion that I just mentioned there, that wudoo is not required from touching the private part. The second opinion, and it's the opposite to the first one, and that is that touching the private part, and we're talking once again about the male touching his private part, nullifies wudoo. And this is the opinion of the Malikiyyah, wal Hanabila, wal Shafi'iyyah. But like we said, the Shafi'iyyah, they said that only touching with the palm, but we'll just include them in here. And some of the Sahaba that held this opinion as well were Umar ibn Khattab and his son Abdullah and Abu Hurairah. And it's also attributed to Aisha radiallahu anha and Jabir and Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas and some of the Tabi'een and ulama as Ata and Tawus, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, Ikrimah and Ibn Jurayj. And the proof that they use is the hadith of Usra bin Safwan, which is in Muwatta Imam Malik, in which Rasulullah said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, "Man massa dhakara fala yusalli hatta yatawadda." That whoever touches his private part, and the terminology used here is referring to the male genitalia in specific, should not perform salah until he makes wudoo. And from the muhaddithin, we have Yahya ibn Ma'in, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. They all declared in one way or another that this is the most authentic narration on the subject. Okay? And Ad-Darimi and others also authenticated this. And there are various narrations of a hadith with similar meanings. So just to quickly get rid of the khilaf about the internal khilaf of this opinion here, as with regards to the Shafi'i opinion that it's only with the internal part of the hand or the palm of the hand, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he quoted Ibn Hazm in which he said it includes both the external palm of the hand, the external and the palm of the hand, and there's no difference between them. And Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he supported that by mentioning, and Ibn Hajar is a Shafi'i scholar, he supported that by mentioning the verse وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا, which is the verse on cutting the hand of the thief. So when it's describing the hand that must be cut of the thief as the had punishment, it is talking about the hand, the entire hand in entirety, which they cut out the wrist. According to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what would be cut would be at the wrist. So that includes all parts of the hand, not just the internal without the backside. So therefore, according to this opinion, with this hadith here that is very clear and direct, any part of the hand that touches the private part, it nullifies wudoo. And then, like I said initially when we started, that there is three other opinions that are kind of in place to reconcile between both sides. The first of which being, if somebody touches the private parts or the private part with desire. And their argument is that we can combine between the ahadith that order wudoo from touching the private part and the ones that say that wudoo is not required by stating that if it's touched with desire is what requires wudoo. Okay? And this is the opinion of some of the Malikiyyah. And they say that without touching the private part with desire, as is mentioned in the first narration of talq we took, If you're touching the private part with no desire, it's like touching any other part of your body, your hand, your leg, your stomach, or so on. Whereas if you touch it whereas if you touch it with desire, then it holds a different ruling. And they even say that it's not because touching with desire in and of itself nullifies, but it's somewhat similar to the mas'ala we took about sleeping. You know, we said that the sleeping, when it comes to sleeping, it's not a hadath in and of itself, but it's madannat al-hadath. It's what may lead to a nullifier. Okay? They say the same thing about touching the private part with desire. Because it doesn't, according to this opinion of some of the Malikiyyah, they say that it doesn't nullify the wudu in and of itself by touching the private part. Therefore, if it's without desire, there's no issue, no wudu is nullified. And if it's with desire, it's not because in and of itself it nullifies the wudu, but rather because it is a madanna for something to be emitted. Okay, so for there to be a discharge. So because touching the private part with desire is a madanna for something to be discharged, that is the reason why someone would have to make wudu. Okay, but there is an issue with this. What's the issue with this kind of reconciliation and stipulation that with desire? What stands out to be problematic? What stands out to be problematic?
What's the question again?
You're not with me. Okay. So they also, some also added that, or stated that this hadith, okay, that إِنَّمَا هُوَ بَضْعَةٌ مِنْكَ is in the context of someone being in salah. So it is, no, wudu is not required, it's just a part of you. They said that this is the context of that narration, even though it's weak, but they say the concept, the context of the narration is that it is during salah. And when somebody is in salah, they're the furthest away from desire because they're busy with the dhikr of Allah, the ibadah, the salah, the dua, and whatnot. So they have no desire, or it's the furthest from having desire when you're in salah. But, like we said, to refute this opinion and its problems, first and foremost, the hadith of talq is weak. Okay? So we can stop at that. The hadith which says that no wudu is required, that's weak. We can stop at that. Number two, even if that hadith wasn't weak, stipulating, let's consider for argument's sake it was an authentic hadith. Stipulating that it's touching with desire, okay, that's not backed by any proof. That's not mentioned at all whatsoever in the narration. So where are you getting that idea from, that it's touching with desire? If you're going to stipulate such a condition, we have to have dalil or a proof to say so. Otherwise, we cannot stipulate such a condition. And moreover, even in the hadith which mentions that someone must make wudu from touching a private part, even that hadith doesn't even mention desire. So nowhere is desire mentioned. Nowhere is desire stipulated or backed by proof in a hadith. Okay, that's the third opinion. The fourth opinion is also an attempt to reconcile between the two opposites, and that is if somebody touches the private parts purposely. Okay? They touch it purposely and nullifies wudu. Otherwise it doesn't. And this is also another opinion within the Maliki madhab, and it was chosen by Ibn Abd al-Barr. And the proof that he used is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِي مَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَكِنْ مَا تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ. That there is no sin or fault upon you if you make a mistake, except if your heart deliberately intends to do so. So they say that this shows if somebody intended it, it nullifies wudu. Whereas if somebody by mistake touched his private part, it doesn't nullify wudu. Okay? What is the issue? This is also problematic. This is a problematic attempt at reconciliation. What is the issue with this? The brothers following, they're awake, they can give us a response. What is the issue with this reconciliation? Okay, the response to this, Ibn Qudamah and Awza'i rahimahullah, they said that the hadith that state touching the private part nullifies wudu is broad, and they don't mention purposely or mistakenly, like we said before. The hadith which mentions that touching the private part nullifies wudu doesn't mention desire, doesn't mention purposely, none of that. It just mentions that wudu is nullified. Okay, what's another problem of using this ayah to prove that touching purposely nullifies, whereas by mistake doesn't? وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَكِنْ مَا تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Where's the problem in using this as istidlal fil ayah? Istidlal bil ayah. Where's the problem here? نعم. But how can explain further, just so we can get a better idea. What is the problem? So using this ayah as dalil is problematic. Okay, it doesn't support what they're trying to prove, and we can prove it. But I wanted to see if any of the brothers can get it before I give it away. طيب, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that there is no sin upon somebody is different than the effect of it taking place. Okay, sure, there's no sin upon somebody if they make a mistake. That doesn't mean what happened has an effect or not. Okay, for example, as we know, and this is a little bit far of an example, but if somebody thought that there's a cup of water here, they picked it up and they drank it, and then it turned out to be alcohol, is there sin upon them? But are they still going to get drunk? Well, depending on how. Let's say they're going to get drunk still. There's no sin upon them, but the effect still occurred. So just because there's no sin upon them does not necessitate that no effect will take place. Likewise, just because there's no sin upon them doesn't necessitate that their wudu won't be broken. Okay, so there's a difference there. So no sin doesn't equate to tahara being nullified or not being nullified. And another way to distinguish or another way to respond to this opinion is that you do not distinguish with regards to nawaqid al-wudu with purposely and unintentional. For example, if somebody, sometimes people can relate to this, if somebody has lots of gas and they're trying to hold it in, okay, then they're trying to hold it in but they cough or something and by mistake they pass wind. Do you say that your tahara is still there because you never did it purposely? It was by mistake? No, you don't say that. You broke your wudu. Whether you intended to pass the wind or not, you broke your wudu. Okay? So with nawaqid al-tahara, you do not say that it's dependent on purpose or not purpose. Okay? So that being said, the argument of it being intentional as opposed to unintentional, it is inconsistent because you cannot apply that to passing wind, you cannot apply that to passing urine and so on. Now the fifth opinion and the final opinion is that it's mustahab to make wudu from touching the private part, but it's not a must. And this opinion is a little bit it's quite an extrapolation because it is inferred from the opinion of some of the Malikiyyah that state that one who touches his private part must make wudu if he didn't make the salah yet. Okay? Stick with me. One who touches, so in the Maliki madhab there's an opinion that says that, or it's something that says that, one who touches his private part must make wudu as long as he didn't make salah yet. They said that if the person, they touched their private part and they made salah, okay, if the time of salah hasn't lapsed, he should repeat the salah. He should repeat his wudu and repeat the salah. But if the time has lapsed, meaning the person touched their private part, but then they prayed and then the salah time finished, there's no need to repeat the salah. So they extrapolated from that. Okay, some ulama, they extracted from that and inferred that this opinion is basically saying that wudu from touching the private part is mustahab. Because if it was wajib to make wudu from touching the private part, but we know that if you prayed without wudu in any other circumstance, okay, by mistake, for example, you forgot that you never even made wudu to begin with, or somebody, they were on janaba mathalan, and they forgot, they don't have wudu, they prayed, and then the time has finished of the salah, so they prayed fajr, and then hours later they realized, oh, I prayed it without wudu. Okay, if the person didn't have wudu, and it was wajib for them to make tahara or to make wudu, then they would have to repeat their tahara and the salah as well. So the fact that they say that if the person, if the time for the salah hasn't lapsed, then they should repeat, but if the time has lapsed and they shouldn't, it shows that it's just mustahab. Okay? And this is the opinion of some of the Malikiyyah, and Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, also selected this opinion, and he chose that wudu from touching the private part is only mustahab. And their proof for saying it's mustahab is a third attempt to consolidate between the ahadith requiring wudu for touching the private parts, as opposed to those which say that you do not have to make wudu from touching. Okay, once again, I just want to repeat that there is no need to, and there is no purpose of consolidating or reconciling between conflicting reports unless they're both authentic. If one is weak, it's weak. We can just scrap it and we can take what is authentic, and that will be sufficient for us. Okay? So we do not have to resort to consolidating between weak and authentic. That being said, what is al-qawl al-rajih? From all of what we took so far, what is the most correct opinion? What seems to be the most correct? What seems to be the most correct? The most correct opinion, al-qawl al-rajih, wallahu a'lam, is that if a male, pay attention, I said male, okay? We're only talking about male touching his private part. If a male touches his private part, then no matter what the condition or whatever, no matter what, his wudu is nullified. Okay, whether it's with desire or not, or intentional or not, if the male touches his private part, his wudu is nullified. Na'am akhi. Very good, subhanAllah akhi. I was just going to mention that, okay? But you beat me to it, jazakallah khair. So there is technically one stipulation, but it's kind of straightforward and common sense, is that if the person is touching without a barrier, so it's not talking about somebody touching above their clothing. Okay, somebody's wearing pants and he puts his hand where his private area is above his pants. No, it's not talking about that. What's being referred to is somebody touching without a barrier, meaning skin to skin. Okay? So if a man touches his private part with no barrier, okay, it's skin to skin contact, then the wudu is nullified. And there's also a narration that mentions that إِذَا أَفْضَى أَحَدُكُمْ بِيَدِهِ إِلَى فَرْجِهِ لَيْسَ دُونَهَا حِجَابٌ فَقَدْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الْوُضُوءُ, which means that if one touches his hand with his private part without a barrier, then he must make wudu. Okay, so this hadith is very straightforward, and it stipulates or requires wudu when touching without a barrier. So this hadith by itself is weak, but taken in consideration with the other authentic hadith about touching the private part requiring wudu, and from common sense, obviously without a barrier, then we can take that as being somewhat of a condition or stipulation. Okay? But the stipulation without this narration is linguistically touching, because when we understand when somebody touches their private part, we're understanding that is being touched without a barrier. Okay? Because technically speaking, if they're touching their clothing, we'd say they touch their clothing, not they touch their private part. Okay? So, like I said, this was the mas'ala of a male touching his private part, and inshallah ta'ala we will move forward next time by mentioning about the hukm of when it comes to females, inshallah. And then we also have some other nawaqid to go through of nawaqid al-tahara sughra or nawaqid al-wudu. So other nawaqid we're going to touch on, inshallah, because last time due to my shortcoming, I said we're going to jump into nawaqid al-tahara al-kubra, but we're not there yet. So other nawaqid we have to go into. There's about 3 other nawaqid we're going to go into, okay? But inshallah, After that, we will go into nawaqid al-tahara al-kubra, or things that necessitate major purification, ghusl. And then after that, we are going to, and by the way, things that necessitate major purification or ghusl, we're going to go through that a lot faster than we're going through what the nullifiers of wudu are. And the reasoning for that is the stuff that nullifies the wudu, there's lots of khilaf around them, okay, between different madhahib, between ulama. Whereas the stuff that necessitates ghusl, or stuff that nullifies major purification, is pretty straightforward and clear, and the evidence on the matter is it's very straightforward and clear, and there's lots of agreement in those masail. So there's no need to expand. Okay, and in addition to that, many of the ahadith we already took up until now already explained that to us, like al-janaba and al-hayd wal-nifas and these kind of things. We already took them in previous hadith, and the hadith are authentic and straightforward and clear. These are things that necessitate major ritual purification. So that being said, we're going to move through that a lot faster. Once we finish that, we're going to just touch on making a purification from al-najasat. So purifying oneself or washing oneself simply from things that are najis. So we're going to go into things that are najis, like urine, feces, pig, dog, and this kind of things. There is some difference of opinion amongst scholars with these things, and obviously this is referring to purifying it from the body, clothing, or place of prayer. And then with that, inshallah, we'll conclude the series of the Fiqh of Tahara, inshallah. So we'll continue bi'idhnillahi ta'ala next week. If anybody has any questions regarding this, feel free to ask. Otherwise, jazakallahu khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammad. Alhamdulillah.